To all our viewers and listeners, Dmitry Trenin is a world-famous Russian analyst of international affairs. Till February 2022, Dmitry was the head of Carnegie Russia. Prior to that, for 21 years, Dmitry was an officer of the Soviet Army, military intelligence, I think, if I'm right. And what is even more important, he was a member of the Soviet delegation at the nuclear talks with the United States, arms control talks in Vienna. Dmitry also holds the distinction, which is quite unique, of being the first non-NATO scholar at the NATO Defense College in Rome. Now, after he has left Carnegie Russia, Dmitry is associated with the Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations. He's also with the Higher School of Economics. Apart from that, of course, Dmitry is a member of Russia's Foreign and Defense Policy Council. And needless to say, Dmitry has written many books, and anyone who's interested in Russian foreign policy and the drivers of this foreign policy must, without fail, read these books. I have read them and I have benefited greatly in understanding what are some of the impulses that drive Russia's leadership to a variety of decisions. And now that we have Dmitry with us, I don't think we will have anyone much better than this to explain some of the issues that all of us are grappling with. Dmitry, since February 24, the world is never going to be the same, if that is the right way of putting it. Every day, in any case, the world changes. But February 24 was a monumental day. But I don't want to ask you how it's going to end. I want to start in a sort of a chronological manner. Just very, very briefly, tell us, why did it happen? Why did February 24 take place in the first place?
Well, first of all, Nandan, thank you very much for this introduction. I think it's not just a very kind introduction, it's overly generous, really. I appreciate, but I think that's been still too generous. With regard to the question, I think the short answer to the question is this. President Putin, who was the sole decision maker as far as 24 February was concerned, decided that he had to settle the Ukraine issue and not leave it to his potential successors. I think he decided that time was not working for Russia, and that a direct clash with the West, with the collective West, was unavoidable. And in that situation, the premium is on those who strike first. But in Putin's mind, as it is in the minds of so many Russians, and I would say so many others, the armed conflict in Ukraine did not really start on 24 February 22. It started 8 years earlier as a result of the Kievan Maidan that toppled the government of Viktor Yanukovych back in 2014. And what we saw in February was very much a new stage of the conflict rather than a new conflict altogether.
So if I can ask you to break this down, you've described it as the Ukrainian issue. But clearly, this is not an issue of Russia with Ukraine. It is something that Russia has in terms of differences with the collective West or NATO in this particular case. Could you, in a few sentences, tell us what are these differences? What is the crux of the dispute, or not understanding each other properly?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of misunderstanding or a matter of miscalculation. But you're absolutely right. This is not a Ukrainian crisis. This is not a Ukrainian issue. This is a Ukraine issue, which is embedded in the larger issue of Russian-Western, Russian-American relations. I think the message that Putin was trying to send to the West, almost since he became president in 2000, and certainly since 2008, when the issue of Ukraine in NATO was first presented at the NATO summit in Bucharest by the American administration, led then by George W. Bush. Basically, Putin was saying that Ukraine coming to NATO and NATO coming to Ukraine would constitute an intolerable potential threat to Russia. NATO is not an alliance which includes Russia. Russia wanted to be, Putin wanted Russia to be in NATO, and he was rebuffed. Historically, NATO is an anti-Russian alliance. So bringing that alliance to the doorstep of Moscow, because the distance between the Ukrainian border and Moscow is just a few hundred kilometers, as you know, would make Russia react strongly. And indeed, that was the message sent to Washington by the then US ambassador to Moscow and currently director of the CIA, Bill Burns. So that was one thing, a security challenge that could be compared to Cuba in 1962, or now in the Russian mind to 1941, the Hitler invasion of the Soviet Union, the aggression against Russia. So those are the principal elements that formed the basis of Putin's decision-making. In addition to that, the new regime that came to power in Kiev through street demonstrations in February 2014 decreed as its first decision measures that would suppress the use of the Russian language in Ukraine, a language that is freely spoken in the country, and a language which is native to millions and millions of Ukrainian citizens who are of Russian descent. So that was clearly another reason for that. The new leadership in Kiev that passed that decree, that was never enacted, I should say, but that was very illustrative of the motives that drove them. That leadership was composed of people from the western part of Ukraine that were virulently anti-Russian, plus those who were orientated toward the United States. So basically a cocktail that did not promise anything good to Russia. We're talking 2014. So those were the things that only aggravated by 2022.
Dmitry, I have always been curious about this question. I understand at the strategic level that NATO is a traditional enemy because first it was anti-Soviet and then it continued in a sort of a anti-Russian mode. But and you probably are the best to explain this, in purely military terms, with modern military arms, could you give me a couple of examples of how NATO coming strictly to the border or to Ukraine would distinctly place Russia in a negative situation? Because the whole world believes that, Russia has got nuclear weapons. It'll annihilate the United States if its territorial integrity is breached. And therefore, why are the Russians worried?
Well, I think this is one of the lessons that we have just learned from the ongoing crisis. And that lesson is that nuclear weapons will not necessarily protect you against another power infringing your critical national security interests in your neighborhood. Yes, Russia has the ability to annihilate the United States, just like the United States has the ability to annihilate Russia. But by now, unlike in the days of the Cold War, this is broadly considered to be highly improbable. So if you read the things that come from a lot of senior experts, ex-military, and some active military and some active politicians in the United States today, to them, it has become possible to inflict a strategic defeat on a nuclear superpower without activating that superpower's nuclear arsenal. This is what the current Defense Secretary of the United States, Lloyd Austin, actually said. A strategic defeat of Russia is the objective of the U.S. policy, or the top objective of the U.S. policy in Ukraine. So that's where we are. This is a very tricky situation because deterrence, nuclear deterrence, is all about psychology. Yes, there's an ability, there's a capability to pulverize another nation. But what's important is whether you believe that this power will be activated or not. And I think that now, 30 plus years after the end of the Cold War, the majority of Western decision makers and those assisting them is that in today's world, it's unthinkable that anyone, including President Putin, would resort to nuclear weapons if he knows that this basically means the end of the world.
Would the Russian leadership share this perception?
Well, the Russian leadership is on record. I'm referring to President Putin. He is on record saying that Russia is not interested in a world without itself. And that is something to be taken seriously. But push comes to shove, and this war, the present war in Ukraine, is considered to be of existential importance to Russia, not just of principal importance as it is for the United States. The U.S. is defending its leadership position, the U.S. defending the principles of the post-Cold War order that it imposed on other countries, including on Russia. But for Russia, this is about Russia itself, whether it will continue to exist as a major power, or whether it will be, well, whether it will cease to exist as a major power and become an object rather than a subject of international relations. So remember, I said that to Russians, this crisis has the overtones of 1962, the eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union over Soviet missiles in Cuba, which President Kennedy at that time considered an intolerable challenge to American security, even though American missiles were placed in Turkey already, yeah. And they were targeting Moscow. But that was all right for President Kennedy. What was not all right is to have similar threat close to the United States territory. So on the one hand, you have 1962 Cuba, and on the other hand, you have 1941 Hitler. And today's conflict between Russia and the collective West over Ukraine has those overtones too, because it's not just Ukrainian forces that Russia is fighting on the battlefield. Ukraine is being very generously, very strongly supported in all ways, in all respects, by the United States, by the countries of NATO, and many other nations around the world. So this is a fight like it was in 1941 against a coalition of of nations that were bent on destroying Russian power and Russia itself.
Which brings me to the question. What you're describing is a situation where the majority of Russians appear united in their understanding of what this war represents. But there is a significant difference between Russia of 2022 and the Soviet Union of 1941 in terms of the capacities to absorb pain, to re-energize industries, to actually grow in terms of production during the war years. The understanding amongst a majority of foreign observers in 2022 or now in 2023 is that Russia eventually, however this war ends, is going to come out economically weaker. Even if it wins the war per se, I mean, it'll declare a victory, but it is going to be economically weaker, not just because of the war, but because the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia are not likely to disappear.
Well, Nandan, I think this is perhaps the most interesting question. To me, the situation is just the opposite. You may be surprised to hear that. But what this war is doing, and I think that's the most important impact of the war, is what it's doing inside Russia. The battlefield in Ukraine is very important. The outcome of that war is very important. But what is even more important is what's happening inside the country. The most important economic fact of 2022 is that Russia has been able to absorb the tremendous blow that was delivered by the collective West. And instead of collapsing as an economy, Russia has taken, taken a dip. There's under 3%, 2 point something percent of GDP decline in 2022. And there's going to be a very, very small growth, according to the IMF, which cannot be accused of being a tool of Russian propaganda, I don't think, these days. But they're talking of a small increase, 0.4% or something, in 2023, and a somewhat bigger increase to almost 2% in 2024. What the sanctions are doing to Russia is closing the books on Russia, to use Senator McCain's memorable phrase, analogy of a filling station masquerading as a state. So Russia is essentially constrained to do more inside the country rather than continue to export raw materials, energy resources to other countries. Russia is still a major exporter of energy, but what is happening within the Russian economy is a revival of some branches. Again, we're talking about very early stages, but what's important is the trend. So Russia is now reviving some of the sectors of its industrial economy, which were neglected in the age of, let's say, petrostate, or call it a filling station, whatever you want, whatever bumper sticker you want to attach to it. For example, Russia is reviving production of passenger airplanes, and that would be a major thing. There are other things that Russia is doing to revive its industrial production, infrastructure. What is immensely important is the setting of the goal of technological sovereignty. Again, Russia has been heavily dependent on Western hardware and software. Again, this cannot be corrected overnight. But the important thing is that Russians realize that there's no alternative to moving away from being an energy appendage to the industrialized world or to the developed world, and doing something better. It's very interesting that the Russian business community, battered as it was, has shown a tremendous resilience and a tremendous ingenuity. I think that's that is the basis for future successes. And finally, let me say that in geoeconomic terms, Russia, which declared a turn to the east several years ago, but never actually completed that turn, is now forced to open up so much more to the countries of Asia, to the countries of the Middle East, Africa, Latin America. In other words, it is turning itself to the fast developing part of the world, which is where the future of the global economy lies. And that is, again, there's a lot to do in all those areas for the Russian business community, and that is a huge plus. So to summarize, the break with the West could be at the same time you just flip the coin. It could be a breakthrough to new frontiers in the domestic economy, in geoeconomics, in technology, in so many other areas. And I think that that's the path that Russia is already taking, and I think this path will lead Russia to a better future.
Well, Dmitry, I mean, that is a very, I would say, inspiring picture you draw of a nation uniting across all sections, uniting around adversity, as it were. But I have just one small follow-up question to what you have said. My experience has been across the globe that the middle class is usually very averse to pain. They are most unwilling to sacrifice their economic well-being for whatever reason it is. In fact, there was a lot of outcry about the Russian reaction to the partial mobilization in September, with lots of people of mobilizable age trying to leave the country. Maybe some have come back now. But I was talking in a broader term, in the sense that you see a very similar thing happening in '68 in the United States. When they announce mobilization, it is the universities that erupt. It is the middle class children who say, no, we don't want to go and fight, So when this idea that you have of a Russian rejuvenation, of Russia reclaiming some of the economic past it had and moving into the modern world on its own terms, it definitely is an inspiring idea, but it will also require a lot of sacrifice and it will involve pain. Do you think the Russian middle classes are willing to go through that pain?
Well, the short answer is that I don't know, but I keep watching. My other point will be that traditionally in Russia, there was a huge disproportion between the rights and obligations of citizens or subjects. The emphasis was so much on the obligations. In the last 30 years, the emphasis has been very much on the rights, privileges, and virtually no obligations. This is a culture that is traditionally very un-Russian.
Hmm.
I think that we are coming to a new balance between the rights and obligations. And that would include not just the middle classes and the entire society, but it would ultimately have to include the ruling classes. Because right now, the ruling classes are being watched very closely by let's say, patriotic activists, or maybe that's the wrong expression, but there are ways of sending their children to study abroad, to having second, maybe first homes abroad, having assets abroad, and actually taking the money out of Russia and parking that money abroad. This is no longer sustainable. Moreover, even if you, as a member of the ruling party or a member of some legislature or whoever, an elected official, if you in today's wartime conditions, if you elect to spend New Year's holidays abroad, you immediately come under scrutiny. So there's more accountability in society. And this is very interesting because until this war, Russian people and Russian elites actually lived in two different worlds. And the unspoken, unwritten social contract between the elites or the authorities and the bulk of the population was, we, the government, the authorities, we do not demand much of you. We do not interfere with how you lead your lives, but you do not hold us accountable for things. We will provide you with the stuff that you should be happy with and you should be thankful for to us, all bought with energy exports, of course, but you do not raise too many questions. Now, this is unraveling right now, even as we speak. That is very important. Actually, for a long time, a long time ago, I came to the conclusion that the first post-Soviet edition of the Russian Federation was unsustainable in the medium to long term. But I could not answer the question how we could break out of that vicious situation, because that was, that was existence without development, essentially. And no one cared about the country. Everyone cared about their own situation. And of course, the people with money had all the privileges, and the rest, a lot of other people only survived from day to day. And I never thought that the path from that unsustainable situation to something new, better, hopefully, would go through a war. And now we have it. And this war is earth-shattering as far as the social, political, economic situation and relations are in Russia. So that's what I would say. At the same time, I would agree with you that many people have. We're talking hundreds of thousands, probably, have left the country. Some of them may return, others may not. Even those who return probably will have to answer some questions, maybe not from the authorities, but maybe from their peers. Why is it that they fled the country when other people were called up and had to, give their lives or give their limbs or, become wounded as a result of the war? That's going to be hard when those two Russias meet. But right now, there's the kind of civic feeling, and that includes volunteerism, volunteer work, people collecting money, collecting stuff for the soldiers on the front line, for their families back home. Nothing that you could have imagined before the 24th, even before the 21st of September, when partial mobilization was announced.
Well, we are coming to the end of our podcast. And naturally, I want to ask you the question, how do you think this is going to end? Not just how, but when? Because we in India, for example, like many people across the world, I'm talking of the global south, are feeling the pain of this war. There are after effects. It's not only high energy prices, it has affected other commodities. There are disruptions in terms of food supply. So this is causing ripples across global economy. So obviously the question in everyone's mind is, how and when is this going to end?
Well, let me first take the easier part of the question and then the more difficult part of the question. With regard to energy supplies and food supplies and stuff like that, I think Russia has been actively seeking alternative ways of bringing its exports to the global market, and even selling those exports at a reduced price. And other countries such as India, but also China and several other countries have been the prime beneficiaries of that. And I hope that with the development of direct lines of communication, the direct economic corridors, north-south, St. Petersburg, Mumbai, that kind of thing, there will be more interaction and more Russian contribution to the well-being of nations around the world, particularly those nations that Russia deems friendly. They don't have to be allies, but they at least they do not side with Russia's enemies. They are not sending their weapons and other stuff to the battlefield in Ukraine. With regard to when it ends, again, I'll take the easier part and then the more difficult part. The easier part is that the larger confrontation between Russia and the United States / the collective West, I think will continue for a fairly long time. Well, say, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years. To me, this is forever. I don't expect to live another 50 years, although I hope I would wish to. So it's for the long haul. With regard to the actual fighting in Ukraine, I don't think it will take many years, at least of uninterrupted fighting. It will take, I think it will take some time. It will take years rather than months. I do not believe that even if there's a ceasefire agreed on the battlefield, which again I'm very skeptical about, that ceasefire will mean an end to the war. I do not believe in a Korea scenario for Ukraine as a lasting settlement, the way it has been in Korea. To the extent it has been in Korea, it will not happen in Ukraine, because any ceasefire that may be negotiated will only be a pause before a new war and maybe an even more intense fighting spell between Russia and the West, because it's a big issue. I think that ultimately Russia will prevail because the stakes for Russia are so much higher, and in principle it has domination in terms of escalation. That option, if Russia wants to dominate the escalation ladder, it can. So far, it has been trailing behind Western moves, but in principle, the situation, because of the higher stakes, makes it completely possible for Russia to raise the stakes to a level where the West will simply not be able to match Russia's level of risk and level of intensity of its fighting effort. So again, a few years in Ukraine, I think Russia's realistic objective would be to reduce Ukraine to a manageable issue, strategically, politically, culturally, whatever, manageable issue, whatever that may mean. I have my own ideas, but that's, I'm not calling the shots.
We don't have
But the
time
wider conflict with the United States and the West, meaning all of Europe, will last many, many years. It is this period that I think will allow Russia to complete its domestic transformation along the lines I have outlined in this conversation with you.
Dmitry, thank you. I think that was a very comprehensive discussion, or rather picture, that you've painted for us about where Russia finds itself today. I don't have the words enough to thank you. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I would have loved to carry on this conversation for a few hours, maybe. But thank you very, very much. And I hope to meet you soon.
Thank you very much, Nandan. And thank you all those who found the time to listen, to watch this conversation and listen to our talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.